What is going on, guys? So today we're back with another deep dive, and today we're actually going to be taking a look at... Sorry, something bit me on the hand. Furret, who is a pure normal type Pokemon, maxing out at only 1758. So we are really close to that 1500 cap for the Great League, which does mean we do have to do a little bit of manipulation on our IVs to get there. With a 1 on attack, 15 defense, and 14 stamina at level 35 and a half, so 35.5. That will actually get you a clean 1500 inside of the Great League, which is actually pretty nice. Now, if you take Furret and you line it up against every other participant inside of the actual Ferocious Cup, and we look at bulk and then stat product, of course, 19th in bulk and 17th in stat products, so that's actually pretty good. That's actually not too bad. Now, of course, all of this does come from our base stats with a 148 on attack, 125 on defense, and a 198 in stamina. That's okay, that's not horrible. I would like to see the attack and defense switched optimally, but you know, we'll take what we can get. So moving on to our moves here, this one's actually pretty clean cut, and judging off of this one and the next deep dive that we're doing, both of these are pretty clean cut actually. So in terms of our fast moves, we do have Quick Attack and Sucker Punch available. Both of these are going to be 3.5 energy per turn for 2.5 damage per turn. The only difference is a Quick Attack is actually going to yield a clean 3.0 on the damage after stat. So with that being said, it literally, I mean, because of the way the Ferocious Cup is set up, especially with a ghost type fast move, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense not to go with Quick Attack. It just makes complete sense to me. Quick Attack definitely seems to be the best option for Furret. Now, if for whatever reason you were going off a very specific team build and you needed ghost type fast damage, maybe you'd want to go Sucker Punch, but I mean, I guess in the event that you want Sucker Punch over Quick Attack, if you're at least targeting something that Ghost is going to be super effective up against, like other Ghosts or possibly even some Psychic types, you will yield at least a 3 on the damage after that super effectiveness kicks in. But I mean, that's completely up to you. Either way, we do have 3 different charge moves to pick from: Dig, Break Break, and Hyper Beam. Now, these are some interesting ones. I personally felt like there was a clear-cut winner here, but it didn't really turn out to be that way. So let's just go ahead and get through these and then we'll talk a little bit about that. Dig at 80 energy per turn for 100 damage per turn at a 1.25 on the damage per energy ratio. Brick Break at 35 energy for 40 damage at a 1.14. And then Hyper Beam for 80 energy, we get 150 damage at a 1.88. This is the only stab candidate here for 180 damage at a 2.25 after we factor in the stab. So it's pretty clear cut to me that Brick Break is pretty much going to be the guaranteed move here. Only 35 energy means we can fire it off really fast. We can try to bait some shields with it if we kind of like let up some of our energy and then try to fire it off really quick. It is pretty abysmal on the damage at only 40 damage, but I mean, we just kind of got to take what we can get here. Then it comes down to Dig versus Hyper Beam. And out of these two moves, they're almost very, very similar when it comes to like energy, but then when you get to damage, it starts to change them up a bit. And then especially once you factor in stab on Hyper Beam, boosting it up to a whopping 180 on the damage, it's kind of crazy. I personally hate Dig. I think that it's a terrible move. 80 energy for 100 damage is pretty like ridiculously low in the damage aspect for me. I mean, if you compare it to something like Earthquake is 65 for 120, if I'm remembering that right, and Dig is just a horrible representation of a ground type move in my opinion. But it just kind of makes a lot of sense here to go with Hyper Beam because we do get so much more of a payoff versus Dig. The only case that I could make for Dig is that it is one of those moves that if your opponent is thinking about Furret inside the matchup, they could be expecting you to go with Hyper Beam because it is the more, you know, better fitting move in most situations. Dig could be the surprise move that you bring, especially if you factor in that there are quite a few of the electric types running around in this cup. So you possibly could surprise some people and turn some heads, but that's probably only going to work one time per round. So maybe not gonna work out too good after you like reveal your secret, but hey, it could be surprising. But anyways, for the purposes of this video, we are going to go with Quick Attack on that fast move. We are going to go with Brick Break, of course, and we are going to go with Hyper Beam, just because Hyper Beam seems to be the better fit here. So going into our shield scenarios up against the entire cup, in the 0 versus 0 shield scenario, we actually end up with a 64.6, which I was actually pleasantly surprised. I always say in the even shield scenarios, we like to see at least a 50% here, so I'm actually pretty nice on that one. In the 2 versus 0, we actually have a whopping 99%. We actually do way better than I expected here, and of course with that 99%, I had to figure out which one was the actual Pokemon that we lost up against. And it is Alolan Marowak. To no one's surprise, that actually makes quite a bit of sense once you factor in that ghost typing on Alolan Marowak versus that quick attack from us is really going to be abysmal on our end, so it ends up outpacing us from the get-go. Moving on to the 0 versus 2, we actually have a horrible 4.2%. I always talk about in the 0 versus 2, I'd like to see at least a 10%. That's not even half of what I would expect, so that is actually pretty unfortunate. But moving into the 2 versus 2, we actually do end up with a 64.6 as well as we did in that 0 versus 0. So we are sticking to our guns pretty good in the even shield scenarios. I actually like that really good. But moving on to the meta, we kind of get a different picture here. So in that 0 versus 0 up against the meta, we do actually hit a clean 60%, which is nice. In the 1 versus 0, we actually do drop just a little bit to a 96% as compared to the entire cup. And Alolan Marowak is the same one here, so no surprise there. In that 0 versus 1 shield scenario, we do actually drop a little bit further, unfortunately, to a clean 4% this time, which, like I said, is pretty horrible. And then in the 1v1, we actually do take a pretty big slide from that 64.6 up against the entire cup, all the way to a 48%. So not even quite 50%, which is kind of where I like to see it. But overall, that's actually not a horrible picture for Furret. I'd say that it's actually pretty clean on both sides. I mean, the 0 versus 2 is kind of unfortunate. We are going to have to really pay attention whenever we run out of shields. We're pretty much going to have very few Pokemon that we can still end up beating if we don't have any shields, so we got to stay clear of that. We got to keep our Furret healthy when we can. So let's actually break down that 48% that we actually have in that 1 versus 1 up against the entire meta. Let's figure out which ones we actually do win against and which ones we do lose up against here. So, starting with our wins, we do have Lickitung, Torkoal, Pachirisu, Alolan Raticate, Raikou, Lairon, Minun, Vaporeon, Delcatty, Piloswine, Suicune, and Bibarel as our wins. Now, in terms of our losses, we do have 2 ties, one up against ourselves, of course, but we do actually tie up against Alolan Sandslash, which is okay, that's okay. Steel and Ice typing, I could see that. As far as our flat out losses though, Raichu, Umbreon, Donphan with Charm, Donphan with Counter, Gramble, Nidoking, Shelgon, Nidoqueen, Alolan Ninetales, Skuntank, and then Alolan Marowak, of course, at the very bottom there. So, as far as those losses go, those are pretty expected. I mean, I was completely expecting things like Donphan with Counter to show up there. I was totally expecting Alolan Marowak to show up here after just looking at some of the shielding scenarios. Skuntank was kind of surprising. Alolan Ninetales is kind of surprising, but they both do kind of make some sense once you drill down. Skuntank having an insane typing that only makes it weak to ground, which unfortunately we have nothing for unless we go with the dig variant, but like I said, we aren't. And then, you know, it's just kind of interesting. So if we move on to our Ripe and Rotten section where we talk about what Pokemon pair really well with Furret versus what Pokemon we just really want to avoid and kind of steer clear of with Furret. If we take a look at the good pairs, I'd say Suicune, Vaporeon, Torkoal, and Alolan Marowak actually make some really strong pairs here. So Suicune and Vaporeon are basically going to be there to take out a ton of the Pokemon that basically give us a ton of trouble to begin with. Alolan Marowak, for one, having that fire type attachment to it is pretty crazy. So we need a way to mitigate that. Nidoqueen, Nidoking, Donphan, I mean, a lot of these Pokemon have a weakness to water in some type of way, so Suicune and Vaporeon make a ton of sense here. If you do have that Ice type move on Suicune as well, it could help you out up against the Shelgon, and you know, it could make things a little easier in some matchups, but we've already talked about how Suicune maybe doesn't want to run an Ice type move either way. And then we do have Torkoal and Alolan Marowak. So Torkoal is mainly going to be used for mitigating some of the electric type damage that could be thrown at us. It would also be great to have Earthquake on Torkoal for this situation, so you can actually help cover a ton of those electric types up against with the Furret, because you really just don't have a whole lot of answers for them. Alolan Marowak, because Alolan Marowak can beat us so badly, it's not really suggested that we take Alolan Marowak and just throw it in against Alolan Marowak. It works in some scenarios, especially if you want to run the Hex variant versus the Fire Spin variant, but whatever. Either way, Alolan Marowak is actually a really good thing to pair with Furret, because it actually does help us up against some of the other just more obscure things that we may run into. Especially if we're running this Fire variant, we'd want it to go up against the Alolan Sandslash, Alolan Ninetales, just things that kind of give us a little bit of a trouble anyways. As far as the things that we want to just completely steer clear of, Donphan with counter is a pretty big deal here. If you can kind of figure out which variant of Donphan your opponent is running fairly early in the game, that would be great for you if you're running Furret, because counter on Donphan is going to be so dominating over the only weakness that a normal type Pokemon actually carries, so we kind of want to mitigate that as quickly as possible. And then Alolan Marowak, we've already kind of talked about it a little bit, but basically it's the ghost typing that just basically gives us so much trouble right out of the gate. Our normal type fast move just really can't push much damage at all, and we basically just don't have a whole lot of answers for that, because if you think about it, even once you drill down into your charge moves, Hyper Beam is also going to be resisted, and then Brick Break, already abysmal damage and going to be resisted by the Go type as well, so it just kind of ends up being a bad story all around. So that is actually going to be it for Furret, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. Thanks so much for watching. As always, remember, if you want to vote for the next deep dive, you can go into the Discord below. You can join that, vote for the deep dive, and it'll appear here in a few days. So yeah, but that is actually going to be it. Thank you again for hanging out. I'm going to go ahead and head out and play those ending credits for you. Thank you guys so much for watching. Always remember that if you like to like videos, you could do that, but if you don't, you could be that guy. Otherwise, let me know what you have to say down in the comments below about the video. I do highly appreciate you guys watching. If you guys want to support me in any way, there are several links down in the description for Patreon, joining the community here on YouTube, or even just directly PayPal if that's your thing. I greatly appreciate everyone's name that's on screen, as you guys have showed some sort of support outside of just viewing the videos, and I thank you guys. You don't understand from the bottom of my heart. So until our next video, guys, I will catch you then.